who is Linda Holtzlander. She is the programming director for the Loudoun County Public Library. She has an MLS degree from the University of California at Berkeley and a BA in journalism from the University of the Americas in Mexico City. She has been an adjunct professor at the San Jose State University and at the University of California. Linda was also a research Fulbright scholar to Helsinki, Finland from 2009 to 2010, where she worked with the Helsinki City Library and their Next Library Initiative. Ms. Holtzlander directed a variety of public program grants from the American Library Association, the NEH, the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities, the U.S. Institute of Peace, Fetzer Institute, and many more. In her positions, she oversees the exhibits, programs, and other public presentations of the Irvin Gift Fund, a $1 million private endowment made to the Loudoun County Public Library for the purpose of creating a better understanding between all people. So it is my pleasure to introduce Linda Holtzlander.
Okay. I'd like you to suspend your real life for 2 hours and experience the Let's Talk About It way that your customers, your students, the individuals that will be coming to your libraries will have the same experience. This is your only chance, the only chance, to be on the other side of the podium. After this session, we will have time for questions, discussions, and whatever. So for this period, just relax. American Stories series begins with Prince Among Men by Terry Alford. For today's session, we will be using an excerpt from the Columbia Sourcebook of Muslims in the United States by Edward E. Curtis IV. And now I'm the faux librarian, but I am a librarian. Okay. Good evening. We welcome you today to the Cascades branch of the Loudoun County Public Library. Yay! And since I live in a community, this is my aside here, I live in a community where 1/3 of the population is under the age of 18. I'm sure there's someone in the audience that left their child at the storytime room and now the child's at the door. Mommy, come on, I want to go. So be ready for all that kind of entertainment too. I am Linda Holtzlander, the programming manager for the library system, and I am also the coordinator of the Let's Talk About It series, American Stories. We are very proud that our library was selected as one of the national sites for this new series, and we're very pleased that you're taking advantage of this exciting opportunity. We will meet every Thursday at 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. right here in this room. 2 national organizations are making Let's Talk About It possible in our library. They develop the project content and are funding pilot programs in 90 libraries and in 7 humanities state councils across the country. The National Endowment for the Humanities is funding Muslim Journeys, the American Stories, as part of the Bridging Culture Initiative that fosters informed community conversations about history, faith, and the cultures of the Muslim world and within the United States. Our other national sponsor is the Public Program Office of the American Library Association. The Public Program Office focuses on libraries as community cultural centers and lifelong learning centers, and as an open public forum for civil discourse. National support is essential to the development of a major project like this, but our local support is essential to implementing the program. So thanks to our Library Board of Trustees who encouraged our application, and for our board chair who is here with us tonight. I'm sure you'll want to thank him. Thanks to the wonderful friends of the public library who have helped with our promotion material and are providing refreshments for all the sessions. Our community partners are Bridges, George Mason University Center for Global Islamic Studies, and the Adams Center right here in Loudoun County community. We want to thank the Islamic Center of Virginia for setting up the exhibit that you viewed as you came into the program tonight. I'm sure you all agree that it was a wonderful opportunity to see this beautiful art. Many organizations and individuals have worked together to bring this exciting and stimulating series free, right here to the comforts of your own library. We hope that these programs will pique your interest in the series topic and authors. Please use the suggested reading list from works in our collection to check out other items that might interest you. Our staff here in the Cascades branch and throughout our library system is eager to assist you, and we want you to take advantage of what your tax dollar provides to the community. I'm pleased to hand out to each of you a copy of Pages, our event magazine, which lists supporting programs for this series. I'm in charge of the logistics, so the most important question is, where is the bathroom? So if you go outside the door to your left, you'll find the bathrooms. If you need copies of the series essay, pick up one at the break, and they are at the program table that will explain what's going on throughout the whole series format. Number 3, be sure to complete the evaluation. And today we have a kind of innovative way to make that possible. We have iPads loaded with the evaluation that are at the back of the room, so when you finish the series, go back there if you would like and do the evaluation for us, and we'll have a ready access to what you're saying about the series. If you're a pen and paper kind of person and you still want to do it that way, we encourage you to do it. I'd like to say it's very important to future funding for the library system that the evaluations are filled out. It's really necessary for our funders to know what you thought and what we can do to improve series like this in the future. Our scholar is the content expert, and it is his job today to be our informed guide for our readings as well as for our discussion. We are indeed fortunate to have Edward Curtis, who is the Millennium Chair of Liberal Arts and Professor of Religious Studies at the Indiana University School of Liberal Arts in Indianapolis. In addition to his work on the Columbia Sourcebook of Muslims in the United States, he edited the 2-volume Encyclopedia of Muslims American History, which received the reference book honors from Booklist, Library Journal, the Society of School Librarians International, and the Pennsylvania School Librarians Association. Curtis is currently editing the regional spotlight on Muslims in the United States for the Oxford Islamic Studies Online, which is part of the Muslim Journey bookshelf. His most recent monograph, Muslims in America, A Short History, was named one of the 100 best books of 2009 by Publishers Weekly. A former NEH Fellow at the National Endowment for the Humanities, he has also been awarded a Carnegie, a Fulbright, and a Mellon Fellowship. Since 9/11, Edward Curtis has lectured frequently in the United States, Europe, and the Middle East about the role of Islam and Muslims in the U.S. history and contemporary affairs. He has contributed interviews and articles on the subject to the New York Times, the Washington Post, the New York Daily News, and National Public Radio. We welcome him as our guide and our facilitator in the discussions today of the Columbia Sourcebook of Muslims in the United States. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Curtis.
Thank you so much, Linda, and thank you to the Loudoun County Public Library for hosting this discussion. Thank you, Kambiz Ghani Basiri, our theme scholar, who came up with a wonderful collection of books for us to read and a great introductory essay. Thank you, most of all, you, for being here and making possible what is so important to the life of our country, an informed readership, willing to talk with one another across social, political, religious, and economic divides. I'm so grateful that we're going to spend some time together this evening. Now, when somebody was up here, they took my lecture notes away from the podium. So we're going to suspend the program for a moment and look for those lecture notes. Because as sharp as I am, I do need my notes. Let's talk about American stories as a theme in the Muslim Journeys bookshelf. And first, I want to briefly talk about the 5 books, and then we're going to discuss the Columbia Sourcebook of Muslims in the United States in particular. The American Stories theme emphasizes the idea that Muslims are not new to the United States. They have been here ever since the country was formed, and even before that moment in 1776. So a strong part of the American Stories theme is history. Okay. This bookshelf helps to establish what we might call their long history in the United States. Muslims have always been a part of who we are as Americans. They have been involved in major events and stories of U.S. history, including slavery and the Civil War, immigration, civil rights, and social reform movements inspired by religious faith. Those are all American stories that, again, cut across lines of class and race and religion. But as much as Muslim Americans have been part of the history, they are clearly, in a way, much more visible and vulnerable today in contemporary America than they ever have been. They are both weary and supportive of the war on terrorism. They are the objects of debates about women's equality, and they engage in these debates themselves. And they are often talked about whenever we bring up what it means to be a U.S. citizen and a patriot, and what our rights and our responsibilities are as Americans. So Muslim Americans stand at the symbolic center of what it means to be an American today. Second, I want to mention that the bookshelf illustrates just how diverse Muslim Americans are. They are diverse racially, ethnically, nationally, and religiously. About a third of all Muslim Americans are African or African American. This is the single largest racial ethnic group of Muslims in the country. This includes American-born African American Muslims and African-born Muslims who have immigrated in the last 10 to 20 years in very large numbers from West and East Africa in particular. Also, we have Arab Americans and South Asian Americans sort of competing for the second spot as the second largest ethnic group. About a quarter each, about a quarter of all Muslim Americans are Arab Americans, meaning that they trace their roots to the Arab world, which extends from Morocco all the way to Iraq. As you remember, Iran, of which there are some Muslims from Iran in America too. Iran is not an Arab country. Turkey is not an Arab country, even though they are part of the Middle East. There are Turkish and Iranian Muslims, but the fourth, probably about a quarter of all Muslim Americans trace their roots to Arabic-speaking countries. And they began to immigrate from in significant numbers from the 1880s. Then we have Muslims from South Asia, that's about a quarter, so Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, and Indians. But there is no more diverse community of Muslims in the world for any nation than that we have in America. And so Muslim America is also composed not only of Iranian and Turks, but also of Central Americans and South American Muslims, European Muslims, including an especially large group of Bosnian Muslims, many of whom immigrated after the Civil War there in '92. Okay. We have Russian Muslims, Central Asian Muslims, and Southeast Asian Muslims, largely from Indonesia and Malaysia. So there are literally Muslims who are from all over the world, and there are American-born Muslims who are Hispanic and who are white and who hail from nearly any kind of background you can think of. According to Pew, Muslim Americans are the single most racially and ethnically diverse religious community in the United States, more racially and ethnically diverse than Christians, than Jews, than Buddhists, etc. Now, these books illustrate both their historical role, their contemporary role, and their diversity. And so I just want to tell you about each of them in turn, and then we'll talk about the Columbia Sourcebook. Prince Among Slaves tells the story of Abdul Rahman Ibrahima, as does the film about his life. This is an American story and an African one too. And it matters for how we see the history of the 19th century, of the 1800s. First of all, it matters for how we understand literacy. You know how librarians like to talk about literacy, and we're in a library. And so I have to bring this up. Because Abdul Rahman, he was literate, as were many other Muslim American slaves. And this disrupts our old narrative. This makes us question our old narrative about Africans arriving on American shores without education and with a people without history, as it was once said. In fact, someone like Abdul Rahman Ibrahima was one of the most educated Americans of his time. He spoke several languages. He was literate, right? Many people were not literate in the 1830s, as you know, or the 1820s. And so this is a person who matters deeply for the way in which we understand American literature, because there were already literate African Americans who were writing for other Americans before the Civil War. And in fact, the first Arabic language autobiography written in the United States was by a man named Omar ibn Said in 1831. And so when we think about African American literature in particular, we need to include the voices of these literate African Americans in our sense of who we have been as a people, as Americans. Okay. Now, Abdul Rahman's story also tells us how race worked, because Abdul Rahman went up and down the East Coast and all around and claiming or enjoying the idea that he was a Moor, not a black African. And because he claimed to be a Moor, or he was seen as a Moor, he got certain social privileges. In fact, it simply didn't square because of the deep racism of the antebellum United States. It did not square with the idea that such a civilized and educated person could possibly be an African. Surely he must be of a different race, it was said by people like Secretary of State Henry Clay. So this tells us how race worked in America, in part. And Abdul Rahman didn't really try to represent, as we say today, as an African American. He was happy to be the Moor because he was focused on the one thing he wanted more than anything, to get home with his wife and his children to West Africa. Now, I just mentioned Secretary Clay, and he was a very important figure in Abdul Rahman Ibrahima's life because he advocated returning Abdul Rahman Ibrahima to Africa so that better foreign relations could be made with the so-called Barbary states of North Africa. Secretary Clay was confused. He didn't realize that Abdul Rahman wasn't from North Africa. He thought he was a Moor, so thus he's from North Africa. And he thought, the American ships wanted a safe harbor in the ports of North Africa. And so he thought maybe this would be, by returning him to his home, he could create better diplomatic ties. So once again, we have a Muslim American whose story tells us about American history overall. And finally, Abdul Rahman's story tells about how philanthropy worked in the United States, because he raised, in the 1820s, over $3,000, which was a lot of money back then, from all kinds of philanthropists, merchants like the Tappan brothers, Francis Scott Key of Star Spangled Banner fame, many Americans who gave him money so that he could take himself and his family back home to Africa. And many of these were abolitionist folks who were also interested in forging economic trade ties with West Africa once Abdul Rahman got home. So just this story tells us an awful lot about what it meant to be an American before the Civil War. Now, let me move on to Acts of Faith, and I'm going to go more quickly through some of these other works so that we can get to our discussion tonight. Acts of Faith tells the story of Chicagoan Ibu Patel, who is from the Ismaili Shia branch of Islam. And it tells the story of how he went from being an alienated youth to being an interfaith leader. And there are twists and turns in this story, but one of the things that Ibu Patel, that he advocates is he says, if we're not spending as much time trying to cultivate an interfaith sensibility among our youth, then we are leaving youth to all of the to potentially negative messages that are so available to them on the internet, and whether we're talking about Muslims or not non-Muslims. And the other thing that he discovered was, rather than having young people sit together and talk about their faith in some kind of interfaith dialogue, he helped to nationalize the idea that we should be doing service with one another, and then we get to know each other, providing public service, okay? And we just happen, if that might be an instance in which we naturally, as we come to know one another, issues of faith will come up. As he took this model from place to place, one of the things that religious leaders said, I don't really want to get my young people involved in interfaith activities because I can't even get them involved in faith activities. And one of the stories that Ibu Patel tells in Acts of Faith is, what's interesting is sometimes you can't really articulate what you believe or how you do something until you have to explain it to a person outside of your faith community. And what he found was that time and again, that the kids who were participating, the young adults who were participating in these service programs would come back to their religious leaders and ask them, what do we believe about X? I don't know that part. What do we think about Mary or Jesus or, And this is very effective. And so he's been able to take this model through both private philanthropic support and through the support of the White House to across the country, and perhaps here in Loudoun County. I don't know. Willow Wilson's memoir is a lyrical book about a white woman who goes to Egypt to teach and ends up falling in love with a beautiful man and ends up experiencing all the ups and downs that happen whenever you move to a different country for a long time. And for her, in a post-9/11 environment, it was a particularly challenging time to be a white American woman in Egypt. But it's one that she embraced with gusto, learning Egyptian Arabic and coming to know this adopted country for herself. And I think since there are so many Americans, perhaps not so many, but a number of Americans who have crossed the same kind of social barrier that she did, maybe somebody in this room who's married someone not from the United States, or married across a racial divide, or a religious divide, a cultural divide of any kind. This book helps us think about those questions, because part of being an American is not only living as an American in America, it's also interacting with non-Americans, both here and abroad. And this book helps us think through those things. Some of the themes are quite universal and go beyond the specific issues involved in just being a Muslim American in Egypt. And finally, before we get to the Columbia Sourcebook, there is Layla Ahmed's Quiet Revolution. And this book helps us understand why so many women feel empowered by making the choice to wear a hijab, a headscarf. That's right. So many women feel empowered by making the choice to wear a headscarf, even if they didn't grow up with one in the Middle East or in America. And one of the great parts of Layla Ahmed's book is that she begins the book not understanding why everybody, she doesn't herself wear a headscarf. She doesn't understand why not everybody, but a lot of people all around her are putting on headscarves. What's going on here? What happened? This is unfashionable in the Egypt in which I grew up, she said. And so she really takes, as readers, she takes us along this journey as she's trying to intellectually figure out why is it? What is this resurgence? Or really this appearance of a new kind of veiling, a new kind of headscarf. And then finally, there's this thick book called the Columbia Sourcebook of Muslims in the United States, and we need to ask the NEH and the ALA who decided to include this thing in this otherwise wonderful list. Now, this anthology addresses many of the issues we have already mentioned. There is a chapter on political engagement among Muslim Americans after 9/11. There's one on gender in American Islam, and one on spirituality. But the assigned readings for the Muslim Journeys bookshelf are those that cover a Muslim American history from the 1890s to the 1970s. And I want to outline before our conversation this evening what these documents are about. The first is the part of an autobiographical statement by Muhammad Alexander Russell Webb, a fella who was born in New York State, grew up a Presbyterian, was appointed by President Grover Cleveland to be the U.S. consul to the Philippines, and ended up converting to Islam there through his reading, not because he met other Muslims, most of whom were down in Mindanao at that time in the Philippines, not in Luzon, where he was stationed in Manila. And Webb's tells us a lot about religion in America at the time, because in addition to the continual development of Protestant denominations and Roman Catholic parishes, we had in the United States an amazing fluorescence of metaphysical religions that sought to explore the mysteries of the universe, sometimes trying to understand the mind as a way of asserting itself over matter, and sometimes trying to figure out how the universe was created and use that knowledge as a way of mastering oneself, or both. And some of the metaphysical religions of the time were an American form of Buddhism, which Webb experimented with, and some included Theosophy and Madame Blavatsky's movement. And it was Alexander Russell Webb who did more than anyone at that time to introduce Islam as a metaphysical religion. He believed until his dying day that there was no contradiction between Islam and Theosophy. Even though he observed all of what he called the exoteric, the outer garments of Islamic religion, including the 5 pillars, he thought in the end that these were a pathway into esoteric knowledge and the inner life. Okay. And interestingly, however, when he set up his mission in Manhattan, in part with the assistance of foreign funds, he ended up not being terribly successful because he tended to try to recruit people like himself, middle and upper class white folks who were not much interested in becoming Muslims. And so his early effort did not succeed in the way that other missionaries would later. Now, at the same time that Russell Webb was converting to Islam and developing a Muslim mission and establishing one of the first Muslim American publications, people like Mary Juma and Mike Abdullah were coming to the shores of America. And they were coming to places, and this often surprises many people who haven't studied the history of Islam in America, to the Midwest. But you know how chain migration works. A couple families go one place, and then suddenly everybody follows, and we end up with a mosque in Ross, North Dakota. One of the very first purpose-built mosques, which looks more like an outbuilding or a granary than what Americans typically think of when they think of a mosque. But it was so cold there that you had to put half of your building inside the ground. Otherwise, it would just be, to pray on the floor in the winter would have been very, very, painful. So we hear about Mary Juma coming and establishing her Muslim American enclave along with other Christian Arabic speakers from Syria and Lebanon. Okay. And but people were also coming at the time from South Asia. And some of them were Punjabi scholars, Punjabi sailors who were getting off at they would stoke the engines, the coal engines of British merchant marine ships and trade ships. And this is very hard work for anybody who has ever done it. You know what I'm talking about. Any coal stokers in the audience here? No, okay. It's like actually my dad used to work behind an asphalt truck at during the summers, and it's just sort of like that, hot. And so some of them decided, this life isn't for me, and I'm just going to get off in New Orleans, and who wouldn't want to just get off the boat in New Orleans and stay? And they moved to Congo Square, and we know this from our U.S. Census, and they married women of color, and they did the same thing in Spanish Harlem, both African-American women and Hispanic women. And they established one of the first sort of significant numbers of South Asians in the United States. Now, there were also visitors coming, including a Sufi master named Inayat Khan, and we read about his view of America, and he spent only 2 years here because he said in the end he couldn't really get his Sufi message, his message of love and harmony and meditation, to take root in America. It was not yet time. He said. And so he married one of the Eddies, from Mary Baker Eddy, founder of one of the great figures of Christian Science, right? And he moved to Europe, and there he established his permanent mission. And but while he was in the United States, he gives us, again, another insight into all of those metaphysical, sort of countercultural Americans, those who don't really want to go to the Presbyterian or the Baptist or the Methodist Church or their local Irish Roman Catholic parish, and who are trying to discover religious truth in other places. Even though his mission was one of short duration, after World War II in particular, Sufi Islam would indeed really start to grow in the United States. And today we have all kinds of Sufi orders or tariqas in the United States, some which are homegrown and some which have been imported and then adapted from abroad. We read about, in order to look for a successful example of a missionary movement, then, we can't look either at Muhammad Alexander Russell Webb or at Pir Inayat Khan, the Sufi master. Instead, we have to look at a group called the Ahmadiyya from South Asia. And this group was one of the first very successful missionary movements, and their leader, as the documents in the Columbia source book points out, their leader focused very early on African Americans. And it is in Black America that they found great success. And Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, the missionary, said to African American followers, first of all, we have social equality in Islam. We are a religion, prince and pauper pray right next to one another. And second, this was your tradition that was stolen from you in slavery, and Arabic was your original language. So come back to Islam, he invited them in the early 1920s. And by 1923, over 1,000 African Americans had converted to Islam through this pathway, and they would be one of the pathways through which African Americans would come to be Muslims, and it was one of the reasons why Islam has become the second most popular religion among African Americans, although, of course, overwhelmingly most African Americans remain Christian today. Okay, so we get to hear about that story. It's also telling that he incorporated some of this metaphysical religion that maybe we can talk more about later into his pitch, because Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, he was part of, it tells us that African Americans were involved also in these metaphysical religions at a very early point. It's not that African Americans were not attracted to metaphysical religion. It's that, one of the reasons why Muhammad Alexander Russell Webb was unsuccessful is he simply didn't want to hang out with black people, right? He was still a product of his age, and he was still a racist. So we also see in the 1920s and then going into the 1930s how Islam take root. By World War II, there were already a dozen different Muslim groups among black Americans. There were mosques in cities around the country, and there were already many different types of Islam. But sometimes we misremember what happened and who we have been. And so one of the things we used to think as scholars that really the only game in town, the only movements that were popular among African Americans were first the Moorish Science Temple and second the Nation of Islam, because especially the Nation of Islam's popularity after World War II. But this is not the case. In fact, it was really Islam becomes an American religious an American religion with many different denominational sort of components, if you will, before World War II. And we read about a homegrown indigenous form of Islam in Noble Drew Ali's Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple, a 1927 document in which there is no content whatsoever from the Quran delivered to Muhammad ibn Abdullah in the 600s, right? But it is his unique take. And once again, we see here that he's adopting some of these metaphysical texts about self-improvement, about thinking yourself into health, wealth, mind over matter, right? And he's incorporating that into his special Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple. For sure, Noble Drew Ali's movement in the 1920s influenced the 1930 establishment of the Nation of Islam in the wilderness of North America, originally established by a man named W.D. Farad Muhammad and brought to the nation's attention after World War II by their leader Elijah Poole, who became Elijah Muhammad. This was the most prominent face of Islam in the country in the 1950s. And many immigrants and other African American Muslims would say, yes, but this isn't the real Islam. But it was, they could not, especially after Malcolm X joined, and with that tandem, with that duo of Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad, it simply was too powerful a message to too many people. And it became the media's favorite face of American Islam. And we read about what Muslims want and what Muslims believe in that document. And then finally, our last assigned text is an interview with Malcolm X called, in a publication called Al-Muslimun. He was being interviewed by Saeed Ramadan, who was the son-in-law of Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brothers in Egypt, and who would be the father of Tariq Ramadan, one of the great European Muslim thinkers of today. Saeed Ramadan couldn't understand why Malcolm, even after he had this amazing experience on the Hajj in which he celebrated the brotherhood and sisterhood of humankind, why he still kept going on and on about the need for black liberation. And Malcolm said, I will not abandon, first and foremost, my commitment to the liberation of black Americans. This is my first job, and this cuts across religious lines. And in fact, at this time, this is a very interesting, we oftentimes think of Islam as an explicitly political religion. But here we have a Sunni African-American Muslim who basically said, I'm going to keep my religion separate from my politics. On the political sphere, I'm going to work for black liberation. Okay. And religiously, he also established the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, and he was going to be sort of a private citizen practicing Islam, and for those African Americans for whom it's attractive, they were welcome, they could convert, they could come pray, they could learn the Quran, and all of these things. But he disagreed with Saeed Ramadan when Ramadan said, if everyone just converts to Islam, we'll get rid of race. It'll disappear. He said, no, brother, not in America. This was his final interview before he was tragically assassinated in Harlem. So these are our readings for tonight. I'm looking forward to speaking with you more. And before we begin that program, I'm going to turn it over to Linda. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Curtis, for the informed and very interesting presentation. Now, we're going to break into our groups, and we're going to discuss the Muslim source book for about 45 minutes. You have discussion points at your table, I believe. Oh, they are going to be passed out to your table shortly. Dr. Curtis will circulate around the room, checking with each group to see what they need, and let's talk about it. Thank you.